So, Assemblymember Seawright, really appreciate your time you're taking here today to discuss the master plan for aging here. So thank you so much. I just want to start asking, your general. Obviously, this is a huge document. There's a ton of proposals in here. Just your general takeaways. Obviously, this was a process for a long time that you were a big part of. What did you take away from what came out of this master plan for aging?
Well, Tom, thank you for having me on. And one thing that I really pushed for this budget season was to tackle home sharing and respite care. We have the New York Foundation for Senior Citizens, a nonprofit here in New York City that does a great job of patching people up with in partners to share a facility, a home when they can't afford their rising cost in rent or their mortgage payments. And I really feel strongly that this master plan on aging is creating a new roadmap for us to follow when we go back into session this January for additional funding and for policies to be revisited and recommended so that we make life easier, more affordable, and more equitable for our seniors.
Yeah, I think people forget about that affordability aspect because there's a lot involved. You look at healthcare as one issue, but just in terms of living, and I think that's the big part of this is living and aging with dignity. I think is a big part of this, right? And making it affordable at the same
Absolutely.
time. Yeah.
People, if you Exactly. And if you talk to our seniors, I have a 91-year-old mother, and our senior citizens prefer to live at home when they can. And so I think it's imperative that at the state level, we provide the support and the resources to allow the senior population to age in place. It costs 30% less to take care of a senior in their home than it does in a facility. And I think that as we look to the future, that needs to be our priority, is to keep people in their homes through programs, through support, through direct support professionals. And that's what we're focused on in this report.
Yeah, and interesting. I have a 91-year-old grandmother as well, and you can see obviously my mother is a big part of her life in terms of taking care of her, and I think that shows you that it touches everybody in a little bit of a different way, whether you are part of that population or not, right?
Absolutely. And one of the pieces of legislation that I sponsored this past session was to create a report and deliver it to the governor, which shows all of the people that are doing caregiving that basically goes unreported, that are family members, that are friends, that are neighbors. And so once we understand the level of caregiving going on, we'll be able to better provide for it and the resources and programs to address it.
Yeah, it felt like that caregiving aspect. There was that line in there that I thought really stuck out was the unavoidability of caregiving for everyone, and that to me, I mean, and I've heard that from advocates. They felt like they were really listened to. That the people that are doing this, that when it comes to this, that was heard by you guys, by the state. At the end of the day, that was really understood, and you could see that reflected in the proposals too, right?
Right, the availability of caregiving, the unavoidability. We're all aging, and so we're going to be there one day if we're lucky enough, and we're going to need that caregiving support. And so that's one thing that the master plan on aging, and I commend the governor and all the stakeholders, the legislators, my colleagues, for the effort that was put into this report. We were fighting and pushing for its release, and it has now come out, and it's up to us to move forward with additional funds and resources to address these issues.
You spoke a little bit earlier. I want to come back to the aging in place concept because you can see that reflected in a lot of the housing aspects of what that looks like for somebody. Why was that such a big focus and is for you at this time too?
Well, I have a storefront office as my government office up in New York City, and the number one issue facing senior citizens and facing residents that come walking through that storefront office is affordable housing. And our senior population is growing at a very fast rate. It's the first time in 10 years that we have made an investment of $45 million to tackle these issues. And affordable housing is just so critical to wrap our policy around.
And you spoke to the session coming up here in January. Of course, as we know, you'll probably come back, but this probably won't be on the table until January when it comes to the policies, the budget season, and all that stuff. When it comes back around, I think that was a big piece of this for people, the funding part of this process. I guess where does that fall into place for you, and now how you move forward when it comes to this when you reconvene in January, that the funding aspect to help implement this?
Well, when we convene in January, I think there's going to be a lot of different areas competing for state funds. But one area we know that we have to continue to invest in is our senior population. And so I'm happy to work with the State Agency on Aging, NYSOFA, and continue to push in these historic uh, amounts of funding that we put in this last session, $45 million, the first time in over 10 years that we saw that kind of investment, Tom. And I know that going forth in January, we are going to continue to push for additional funding to tackle things like seniors being able to age in place. We have the designation in New York State as being an age-friendly state, and we need to live up to that title. And so we're going to fight for those fundings this come January.
I know finally here, obviously this is more of what's gone on in the last week with the so-called big beautiful bill, the reconciliation plan at the federal level, and that we just alluded to coming back in the fall to be able to figure out the state budget when it comes to that. Well, how does that factor into all of this at the end of the day?
Well, I think what we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C., is huge cuts. And you're right, we're going to be called back to Albany to deal with these cuts. But one thing that we cannot overlook is housing, healthcare, and our aging population. And so we have to keep that front and center as all of the different areas and issues compete for resources to make up for that loss coming out of Washington.
I'd imagine this master plan does help focus that a little bit more, right? Because I think
It
that's really what's important now. Because I think the state's going to have to be more efficient, right? With where it spends its money. And now this gives it a real framework to be able to say, okay, here's exactly where we need that money, right?
That's exactly right. And it's a roadmap to look at the various programs and issues that affect the senior population. And this master plan on aging was a long time coming, and it's right on target on how we need to proceed to provide more efficient, both financially and policy wise, for our senior population.